Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of All Access AM. I am Billy Embody on this Thursday, coming to you from a remote location, just fresh off watching SMU get after it a little bit this morning during spring ball, and we have a awesome show for you guys today as ESPN and ACC Network analyst Eric Mac Lain will join us in just a moment here as we continue to look at the ACC as a whole in the lens of spring football, seeing some of the big storylines developing over the course of what was March and now into April. And we're excited to have Eric with us in just a moment, taking some time in the quote-unquote off season, of course, to join us. But we do want to say we are presented by our friends at Horn Legend. Horn Legend continues to add to their collegiate collection. Make sure you guys check them out, whether you're a Clemson fan, a Clemson alum, like we might hear from in just a moment, or on the SMU side of this conversation this morning. They have everything from the ACC covered. Make sure you guys start addressing your game day wardrobe with our friends at Horn Legend. Go to hornlegend.com. The link is in the bio. You can check it out there. But now we are pleased to jump right into it with our friend Eric Mac Lain, who joins us on this Thursday morning. Eric, thanks so much for the time. Good to see your face.
Billy, great to see you, brother. Thank you for having me. This is long overdue. I'm glad we could finally make it work. It seems like the schedule's never getting lighter, no matter what season that we're really in here. But great to see you, brother. Excited to chat some ball this morning.
You bring up something that's really interesting, I think, in terms of there's no off time, there's no off season, of course. College football as a whole remains in the conversation. Some things we love about that, which is just the exposure, but other things are that all the different calendar discussions, NIL, rev share, all of those things. Is there a better time, though, to be talking about college football for a living than what we get to do?
Yeah, it seems to be very relevant right now and on a lot of people's minds, and a lot of people that are very interested and very vested in this sport. So I totally agree with you that there can be that doom and gloom, right? You can fall into that trap a little bit of back in my day, we did things like this and that, but the sport is as popular as it's ever been. It is as diverse as it's ever been in regards to who's at the top, and the parity's at an all-time high. And so I think that should be fun, for fans and for everybody involved. There was a lull there where it was Clemson and Bama, right? And everybody was sick of it. And those guys just played, it seemed like, for 4 or 5 years straight. And everybody was like, well, we're sick of seeing them. And then the Georgias and Ohio States kind of reared their heads up. And it was only those 4 teams that ever really made, any noise. Well, now, man, Indiana just won a freaking national championship. I mean, it's crazy, to see where we are. And I think that should be ultimately encouraging, to everybody that, man, you're just a coach away. You're a couple players away. You're a couple boosters away, from winning and playing in a national championship. So how bad do you want it, at the end of the day?
You mentioned Clemson, of course, that incredible run. You were a part of that. We have some familiar faces now reunited there in Clemson. Let's start there. Of course, I do want to get your take on Clemson going into the spring. Could you have imagined a world if I told you a couple years ago that we're going to have Chad Morris back in Death Valley coaching, not only just, watching and observing, but coaching and calling plays and getting ready to bring his offense back to Clemson?
Yeah, no, I could not have. There'd be no way that I would have thought that would have been a thing. But I'm grateful for it, right? I mean, he's a guy that I'm very familiar with, and he was my coach for 4 years that he was at Clemson as the offensive coordinator, and obviously we were very successful. There's no arguing with what he did for Clemson. I mean, he got them out of the I formation and into, kind of current football, and where, Clemson was able to have that success kind of standing on his shoulders with Tony Elliott then taking over the play calling, winning, 2 national championships, who now is the head coach at Virginia. So, I think it's certainly an interesting thing, but it's a great thing. And I can just tell you from being at one practice and obviously seeing the spring game, that there was such a noticeable difference of intensity, of tempo, accountability. Listen, a guy messes up on the field. It's not just like, oh, okay, we'll get better. What'd you see there? He's getting cussed out right there in front of everybody. Why did you do that? Tell me what you thought. And no, that's wrong. This is how it's supposed to be done. Oh, by the way, run it again. And so that immediate, correction, that intensity, that was just very evident. I mean, I'm on the sideline, and they do a drill called Team Tempo, which I think they've done the entire time, but the level of it, I'm getting PTSD over there. I'm hearing him scream and shout. I'm just like, oh gosh, this is taking me to a dark place. But man, it's great to have him back. Excited to see what he's going to do in this first year. And I think, for Coach Dabo Swinney, just from like a language discussion comfortability stage, I mean, Chad is obviously a guy that he doesn't just trust wholeheartedly, but he loves him, is his brother. It's a guy that he brought in and had that instant success within his first year, winning an ACC championship in 2011. I think Clemson hadn't done for 20 years before that. And so there's a lot of comfort, there's a lot of familiarity. Coach Sweeney doesn't have to hear a play call, think about what the play call is, think about how we used to do it, and then, okay, that's what we're doing. He hears it, he knows it, he knows what's happening. So I'm also hopeful and thinking that that's going to allow him to now go back to full CEO mode, where he's just running the team and literally is the best in the country at doing what he does. I'm hoping this gives him that, and Clemson gets back, to being its superpower and what it was in that half a decade stretch.
And the quarterback competition is really interesting. I mean, Chris Denson didn't seem like he got much time in the spring game. I do want to get your thought on Dabo Swinney taking over the mic at the spring game. I don't know if you heard about that. Basically.
Only did I hear about it, I was there and heard it.
Okay, I didn't want to say, okay, assuming you were there, but I'm glad you were. I've never seen really anything like that. Yeah. There's not too much of that goes on, but he was. Let's just say accountability was certainly a piece of that puzzle and the quarterback competition that's going on between Tate Reynolds and Christopher Vezina.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting choice to be on the PA, for the entire game and allow all of us to hear your thoughts. But hey, maybe that's the level of transparency you want. I will say though, for 3 or 4 years, he was on TV with us doing it. Yeah. I was down on the field doing it. So I guess it's similar. Maybe even more people saw it because it was on TV instead of, whatever the capacity crowd would have been, for that type of game. So he's not used to it. He's had a mic in some form or fashion for the last 5 or 6 years during that game. But it was an interesting choice for everyone to hear that right then and there, those corrections. But I think going back to the quarterback competition, we all know that Chris Vezina is going to be the guy until proven otherwise. And SMU fans and you guys know, I mean, he came in and threw for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. I don't know what else you really could ask for a guy other than getting a win. Obviously, SMU defeating Clemson at home there, but that was a valiant effort, for him in his first start. So the not only the loyalty part of him staying, all 3 whatever years he is sat, but also the performance when he got an opportunity. He performed really admirably there. So excited to see it with him being the guy. But as we know, and as we expect at every position, not just, one here or there, every position, it's always a competition. There's always going to be things that we do, that if you're not the guy and if someone behind you's pushing and they're better, they get the nod. So if that ends up being Tate Reynolds, the true freshman who looked fantastic, physically looks like he is ready to go. I think it's going to come down to mentally. Can he process and does he know, where to go to the football? When he's got a guy screaming down his neck and the coverage changes last minute. That will be the interesting piece. But, I think we do feel better about where the quarterback situation is. And I do like the fact that, they came out and said Tate has earned it. Tate has taken this second team spot and he's going to continue to push for the first team. And I don't want to compare it to 2014 when you had Cole Stout, the savvy senior who had been there, waited his turn. Now it's his turn. And Deshaun Watson comes into play. I don't want to compare it to Kelly Bryant, similar situation in 18 where now it's his team and he had waited and now it's his show, and had Clemson number 1 in the country all of 2017, got them to the college football playoff. And then here comes, Trevor Lawrence. I don't think Tate is Deshaun or Trevor right now. Now, could he turn into him? Maybe. I don't know. But I don't think it's quite that, but it is similar in what it looks like from a guy that's been there. Here comes the new talented freshman.
Teams across the ACC that don't have quarterback discussions going on, schools like Miami, SMU, NC State, those positions are so vital, obviously, to success. we see I think a really good quarterback class in this ACC season coming up with those types of players back. But we also have some young talent. You mentioned Tate Reynolds. I think of Mason Heinschel and what he's got an opportunity to do as kind of like his first full year as a starter. When you look around this league and the amount of quarterback talent, we haven't even talked about Alberto Mendoza coming into Georgia Tech. What's that going to look like? The league, I feel like, needs to show a little bit more of the talent top to bottom that they've got at that position.
Well, so it certainly would be nice. It would help, everybody kind of involved with that. If guys that, can step up and do what we think they can. You look at the talent at Virginia, signing 2 guys, bringing 2 transfers in, and Perbula from Missouri probably ends up being that guy. Super dynamic athlete, had a really good arm, and was dealing before he got injured, at Missouri there. You look and see the transfer from, Virginia Tech or to Virginia Tech from Penn State coming in, who beat Clemson, in the spring game there behind talented Drew Aller. And he comes in and, man, he finishes super strong and just gets better every single week. There's a ton of depth. And I even think of, the superstar talent that should immediately, be on everybody's radar with Kevin Jennings at SMU, with, from going from Duke, to Miami, Darian Mensah, arguably the best quarterback in the country. I think those 2 right there are fighting for that number 1 spot. But there's no question the quarterback talent in the ACC is enormous, and that needs to and must translate to wins. That has to be that competitive depth. And, what that means to me is these early weeks and rivalry week, you have to fly that flag and win outside of the conference. Now, that's something that we were able to do, pretty nicely a year ago, had a great record against the SEC, and just have to continue to do that. And really, I think it obviously helps when it's the brands, when it's the big dogs up front, but also when, Virginia Tech and a Vandy play, Virginia Tech, get that win, make that happen, because then it's the lower middle tier, that really kind of beats, people up and gets, other folks excited, not just the top dogs. And certainly Clemson will have an uphill battle and an opportunity going to, LSU week 1. And there's plenty of others that, will have a really nice ability, to make a stand and to make a statement early in the season.
That statement that Miami made last year, going all the way to the national championship, man, gosh, special teams block punt, so close for the Hurricanes to returning to the top of college football in that national championship game. A great one, really one of those memorable ones, at least from my eyes, not just the Cinderella story, so to speak, of Indiana getting it done, but Miami's long-term sustainability, I think, is a huge storyline for the ACC. You mentioned those brands that are, really trying to pick up the slack a little bit and get back to where they want to be. The ACC, though, getting that validation of Miami making that run, how important is that in your eyes as a member of the ESPN ACC Network crew, that Miami was able to get in, controversy aside, and advance and take care of business?
Well, I think that's the biggest point, is that, we had to beg and plead for them to be allowed in, right? Like, that's what was crazy. I mean, they were literally the last at-large bid the at-large bid to get the nod. And we're just kind of sitting here like, there's no way this is about to happen. There's no way that Miami will not be in this college football playoff. Look at what they've done. I get the losses. I understand. And people want to, make those even worse than what they truly were when you have some really quality teams, that they lost to, and how they lost, I think, is even more important. But then they run the table and they physically dominated teams that were across from an Ohio State team that's going to have like 4 top 10 picks. That's arguably the most talented team ever on paper. They handled them. I mean, they whipped them and really held those guys in check and did things that they hadn't been done to all year long. And so, really to go all the way, to be on the brink of a team of destiny, it felt like, for Indiana, who they played. And for that game to end, like you said, with a block punt touchdown, and with kind of just a bad decision. I think Carson got tricked, to be honest, that last play, that interception that he threw, because they were about to walk down and score. I mean, they had everything in front of them. It wasn't like, this is a Hail Mary, we got to have this right now. But Carson thought he saw something, and they disguised it well and ended up getting an interception. That they were right there. I mean, they're 3 plays away from a national championship. So I think that validation not only for Miami, and as you said, the sustainability, what they have going in, the influx of not only NIL, but also who wouldn't want to go to Coral Gables and play football? Like, who doesn't want to be, at that legendary place wearing the U, all the history, the All-Americans, the Hall of Famers, the first round picks, that they have. Oh, by the way, now they're really good. Jeremiah Smith, arguably the best player in college football, wide receiver at Ohio State there, was asked the question leading into that game, if Miami was doing what they're doing right now, would you have stayed? And he said, yes. Like they just weren't good. They weren't up to the standard, that an elite player, wants to be a part of. And you can't knock a guy for going to Ohio State. They have the most wide receiver draft picks, highest paid wide receivers, in the last 10 years. And so it is what it is. But I think all of those factors coming together for Miami, yeah, it's sustainable. And I've said it on other Miami Hurricane shows. I've said it on our TV show. I've said it on our podcast. I think we're in for like a decade of dominance from the Hurricanes. Like, this thing is not slowing down anytime soon.
And the reason why they got in a sense, is that they didn't necessarily end up having to play an ACC championship game.
Right.
They had their resume. It was very much good enough to get in, and then they proved that with the run that they went on to the national championship. I do want to touch on reigning ACC champion Duke and Virginia, of course, and the game that they played, a true classic. It's just a great football game.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on the tiebreaker situation? Because I just almost can't get on board with the college football playoff being one of those pieces of it, even though as we add more conference games, theoretically you shouldn't get to that final piece. Yeah. What's your take on the tiebreaker discussion around the league?
Well, yeah, I think it was atrocious. I mean, we almost cost ourselves not only millions of dollars for whatever institution was able to run the table, in this case, $20 million potentially, for Miami that they would not have gotten, but all that publicity, all that, ability for us to be able to stick our chest out and say, yeah, we're here. You're not. To other leagues. And that almost didn't happen, self-inflicted wound, because of the tiebreaker situation that I know everybody allegedly agreed upon and everybody was gun-ho about. But, man, what an oversight. And I guess I'm glad it happened the way it did. And now it better not ever happen again type of situation. Because, man, we've got to protect ourselves. Nobody else is going to protect this league. So we certainly cannot hurt it. And when we certainly cannot hurt ourselves, we being the ACC. And so, yeah, I hope there's major red lines that we're given all to that and chop it up, throw it away, figure it out. It's got to be better. And it was weird because it was a strange spot for us. Like, I love Duke. I love them to death. And I love the administration. I love the coaches. I love the players. I love the place. I grew up in North Carolina. It's somewhere that's very special to me. And it sucked being in a position of like, I need Duke to not win this game. Like, Duke cannot win. The fact that they're even in it is already kind of a black eye, for our conference here. And that's unfortunate. So, whether the overall rules change, which they are this year, like Duke would have been in the college football playoff by these rules that we're playing with this year for the CFP selection. The big dogs, if you win a championship, you're in. That winner of a league is in. And so just given the climate of how that was handled in regards to the selection process, it almost was catastrophic. And so I hated that we were in that position of, again, not cheering against them, but we want the ACC to succeed as well. And that's awesome that they were able to accomplish that. And the first Duke ACC championship in football ever. And you see the run that Duke went on in the ACC, the first team in the history of sport of the major level to win a football, men's and women's basketball championship, conference championship. Duke accomplished that. So I think Duke is the tippy top of what you want your athletic programs to be, what you want your athletic department to be. They're killing it. And so I just hope that we're never in that situation again, which this year we won't be. Winner goes, whoever that is.
Yeah, that's important. And getting through that with, I think, the conference games going up to 9 for the most part will help a good bit. And I think, with the way the ACC wants to schedule, that's important because, look, I think we will one day get back to, and I think we saw it with Miami, getting rewarded for playing a strong schedule.
Right.
And
it should matter.
It should matter. I'm not opposed to 11 Power 4 games. I think that's a lot. But man, it would be nice to see that type of competition around college football be more widely embraced, and not just by the ACC trying to play 10, 11 games against Power 4 opponents each year. But with that, Virginia, Duke, they made their way to Charlotte. They did play for an ACC championship. Do you see them staying among those top teams in the league? I think in particular it's going to be a tough road for Duke.
Yeah, I do too. And again, I just kind of gave you my soapbox of how much I like Duke, and I think Manny Diaz is
the man.
Right. I think he's unbelievable. I mean, I think he's one of the best coaches in the entire country, and he can look at a roster and he knows what he has and what he needs, and he can call defenses like anybody's business and motivate a team. I mean, hearing that guy with us versus in the locker room is completely two different guys. I mean, he is amazing. With that said, they lost a lot. You're right. And with what happened with the Mensa and Barkate situation, with all the guys that just are moving on, there was a big flux of talent that's leaving. And so that's going to be difficult. Not to say that they can't, but I do think they have a bit of an uphill battle. Virginia has lost a lot as well. Now, I like those two quarterbacks they brought in, and surely between one of them or the two of them, you get one that is fairly dynamic. And I think that they and Duke have. The biggest thing is they've committed, right? Like there has been an infusion of money. There has been support. There has been maybe not quite whatever you need, you got it, but pretty close, and I think they both have, showed that that's what it takes, to be able to play and be able to sustain, success here. So a really interesting year. If you ask me, am I sitting right here today betting that those two teams will play again in the ACC championship? The answer is probably no, but it probably never is, and it just happened. So, they do have recent history on their side, and it was tremendous to see that run for both of them.
When you look at the 2026 season, and look, we're in spring ball, so of course we're going to hold you to this. I mean, this is
as you should.
Sharpie. Who are you feeling as your 2026 Virginia? Kind of a team that comes out of nowhere, has that type of Cinderella-ish story. And puts themselves on the map, or returns to putting themselves on that map for the ACC this year.
Yeah, I think the good thing about Virginia is you got a lot of your offensive line back. Most of your offensive line, is back. So those trenches are important, right? And that's going to be a really big deal, for them. You have some playmakers, at the skill positions in regards to a couple of wide receivers and a tight end you feel good about. But then the other guys are some new guys, that probably are going to make up a majority of your production at the running back position specifically, and then a couple other wide receivers and, quarterback. Again, I mentioned, I think it's going to be, Bo Perbula. I think he's a very talented quarterback. I think he fits the system and is very Chandler Morris-like. I think that they can replicate all the success that they had a year ago, and to be able to really do that. Defensively, you got a bulk of your team back as well, at least guys that have been in the program that know, the standard and what they expect, from Virginia and how you step out onto that field. So a little bit interesting for those guys, starting in Brazil for a conference game. We didn't think Virginia, NC State could get any weirder, so we had to put it in Brazil to make that happen. So they'll start there, which, is interesting. It's different. What they'll have to really face there. But, what does that mean the rest of the way when you see their draw fairly manageable, very manageable out of conference schedule? I like that they're playing, West Virginia just to mix up the Big 12 teams there. But, you're at, Florida State, a game that was cinema, that was TV worthy, that was movie worthy a year ago. You're at SMU, which we know how good, the Ponies are going to be. And then, of course, finishing at Virginia Tech. What do they look like? Stealing that cup, right? And allegedly putting it where it belongs in Charlottesville, that great rivalry there that has been extremely lopsided. That Virginia Tech has won 1 billion of those games. Virginia has it. And can they double down on those guys? It'll be interesting to see 2 in a row.
If you had to pick an early ACC championship game, who you got? Who you got probably facing Miami?
It's always Miami. Every year it's always Miami, which,
they still haven't gotten over that hump, though.
It's crazy. But, honestly, people say that, and I think other people say it to make fun of. I think Mario Cristobal could not care less if he's in the national championship every other year. I don't care about it. Great. Be awesome, but I don't care. But it's nice to have. It'd be nice to have one banner in the league that you were supposed to dominate your entire existence coming in. So I would say Miami for sure there. Then it gets weird, man. It's like, what is your flavor of the day, for that team? I have high expectations for SMU and having Kevin Jennings. I think Pittsburgh is an interesting case study of, can they just finish? They get hot early in the season, then they just, kind of fall to pieces there. What is Florida State going to be? What is Clemson going to be? And I like Virginia Tech a lot too. I like Franklin and his whole approach there. So I think the good thing is, we've got options for the second team. I guess the comfortable thing will be SMU. I feel like of the teams I just mentioned, and I'll even throw NC State in there with, Bailey kind of being in maybe his final form with the Wolfpack, the talented, quarterback there. I think I know the most about SMU, or what I think I know. So I think Kevin Jennings, if he's healthy, man, what a fun matchup that would be to see the Mustangs back, 2 and 3 years. And then the Miami Hurricanes, potentially being and winning their first ever.
I think Louisville is one of those teams for me too.
Can never count them out. All they do is win 9+ games every year.
Yeah, and hey, maybe not having a more well-known type of a name at quarterback ends up panning out. I thought Miller Moss. I was a little skeptical on him last year, but they also dealt with some injuries, some key injuries. But Lincoln Kienholz, the reports from Ohio State seem like he's kind of
the guy.
Dude.
And don't look past Wake Forest. Now, listen, I saw them early. I
will look past them.
Right. Well, they won 9 games,
exactly.
And they got Gio Lopez. Gio Lopez is being back with his offensive coordinator from the South Alabama days. We might see some magic in Winston-Salem, man. Who knows?
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you get a little bit of time off in the quote unquote off season. What's this time of year like? Are you traveling? You going elsewhere? Getting around for spring?
Yeah, we had a little bit of a vacation, where we have like a month that we can kind of take off. And really April, we start sprinting again. So no time off in the near future. I'm doing the UFL, so you can see that on, ESPN and ABC, throughout the spring. And then, we head up to Bristol here in a couple of weeks to do a big recap. We'll do 17 shows of every team, or whatever that breakdown eventually looks like. So we'll get a little busy here. And hopefully be able to talk to some coaches, some players, and then we settle down for the summer and wait for late July, and then we just start sprinting again.
See you at spring meetings?
Yeah, maybe.
Did you get the tap on the shoulder for that one?
Okay. We'll see if I'm available. Who knows?
Love it. Well, cool. Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining us on All Access AM. We appreciate it so much.
It's you, brother. Good seeing you always.
Yep. There he goes. Eric Mac Lain joining us on this Thursday. Just one of the best in the biz, and we appreciate so much him giving his time to us. He is a busy guy still in the off season, and like he said, schedules just getting them lined up. It finally worked this week, and we're so appreciative of him joining us. Appreciative of you guys tuning in on this Thursday morning, and I want to unpack a couple things that Emac said on his appearance, and kind of go into how some of the ACC storylines are trending, and we'll do that in just a second. But I do want to remind you guys that we're also presented by our friends at Socorro Tequila. Socorro Tequila is one of the hot names on the tequila side of things, breaking into the industry and quickly making a name for themselves as an award-winning tequila brand. You can try their Añejo, Blanco, the Reposado. Go to SocorroTequila.com. The link is in our bio, and they are just terrific to us, and we appreciate them so much for supporting us here at All Access AM, and just again, a really, really strong tequila company that you can bet will have that clean taste for you guys. So it's not any additives, it's just agave, water, and yeast. So make sure you guys try it out. SocorroTequila.com is where you can get that on your shopping cart, and then have it delivered right to your door. Pretty sweet deal there. You don't have to go searching for it at your local liquor store. So with Eric joining us, I wanted to just kind of go into some of my thoughts on him. When we have guests on, we'll throw a little conversation, but largely we want them to share their opinion, and then we'll unpack some of those things. I want to go to the ACC championship game pick, Miami, and I didn't want to have Eric on forever, and he had somewhere to go right after, but the Pitt pick, as far as a team he's really watching closely, can they finish, is something that I'm in complete agreement with. Can you see that team getting over that hump? He mentioned NC State briefly as well. And to an extent, you've got to toss Miami in there a little bit. Now, we know Miami finished their season very well, but like he mentioned, that's a team that was supposed to be in the ACC championship game year in, year out and producing at a high level as a whole. And, they fell on tough times. It took them getting Mario Cristobal to change that and make that move into, one of the top programs in the entire country. I don't think there's a hotter program in a sense outside of Indiana than Miami with the resurgence that they've had. We've had teams that are at the top of their game for years now, the Ohio States, the Georgias, those type of programs that, continuously show up and win big games and make the college football playoff and win national championships. And those teams even have that what's next, how do we get back there type of conversation going on right now in their buildings, I'm sure. And for Miami, they're seeing that ascension. They're going up, the ranks all the way to a national championship game. And, when you see them do that type of a thing and go all the way, that gives you better faith in them moving forward that, hey, we can now pick these guys to make it to Charlotte and make the ACC championship. But when you look at a Pitt, you're still sitting there saying, okay, how do we make Pitt happen? How do we make NC State happen? And that's something we've talked a lot about on this show. And even to an extent, and I thought Eric put that so perfectly with SMU, when you say, I know the most about them. And that's where we come from when talking about our early picks. It would be Miami and SMU in the ACC championship game. But how do you assess the rosters? How do you assess that ability to finish? That is something you can't necessarily put a easy answer on, because it takes so much to put together a team that can win the amount of conference games you need to, that you can have that level of consistency game in, game out. I mean, we saw that from an SMU to make it to the ACC championship game 2 years ago in 2024. They went unbeaten in the ACC part of their schedule, and that was a really difficult slate for them still. And it's hard to pick out a team that can find that level of consistency, especially in today's age of college football. And I think the good thing for the ACC is, those options that, Eric talked a lot about, they're there and they're available. It's a matter of who can put that together for an entire season. It takes such a level of focus to do it. And Pitt is a team that I think talent-wise was one of the top talent teams in the ACC. I just think from a consistency standpoint, they needed a little bit more. And they've got to find that. And maybe they will with that familiarity of Mason Heinschel being back in the fold. That's an important piece to that puzzle, is how good can he be to be that dude in his second year as a starter. When you have the talent that he showed right away as a true freshman and the ability to kind of settle in and be efficient and be ready to rock and roll just right out of the gates for a lot of those games that he started in, and even going down to Georgia Tech and doing what he did. Those are important pieces to the puzzle of seeing that maturation. How do you take that, what you did so well in 2025, and have that similar type of success in 2026? Because Pitt, they faltered early. That's why Mason Heinschel went in and eventually took over the starting job and did what he did. But can you not falter early so you're in that conversation? So late in the year, you're looking up and you're, oh wow, we're 9-1, we're 10-0. How can you kick through or kick down that door and get there? That's something that Miami missed out on last year with those losses to Louisville and SMU. They ended up playing really well down the stretch, earning their way into the college football playoff, and it paid off, obviously, getting selected and being able to make your way to the national championship game. But there's still so much that goes into it, and that's the fun part of trying to diagnose it in the ACC. And ultimately, the team's focus level, because the league has so much talented teams at its disposal and options to make it to Charlotte, it makes it an interesting offseason discussion. I really believe that this league has as much parity as anybody in the country, and I don't necessarily think it's, for the most part, teams that are just a product of a bad league. I really think the coaching in this league, it's almost a little bit of a combination of, and this, if anybody were to clip this or whatever, which they're not because it's me saying it for the most part, but it's kind of a combination of SEC Big Ten kind of mentality and team building. You see some of the physicality in the league that like a Miami brings to the table and that an SMU brings to the table, and kind of a Virginia from a mindset and a toughness standpoint. But you also see certain teams that have that SEC level type of roster, as far as big bodies, athletic, players on their rosters. You look at your Clemsons, your Florida States, your Miamis. I still think Virginia Tech, it has fallen on tough times at the skill position and the quarterback position, and that's really shielded a lot of their overall kind of team talent base that they've had. And there are other programs that have a high floor of athlete. I mean, we're seeing it now at SMU and what they've been able to do, and trying to build that level back up. Cal is going to be a great case study about, hey, somebody that fits so well at that program with Tosh Lupoi taking over. He's got a quarterback. They've got some fun faces like an Adam Mohammed coming in. How can he be a difference maker? The linebacker position is really strong. But at the end of the day, you're taking over a program that fired their coach for underachieving relative to expectations, but was still coming off a bowl game. And you saw at various times and moments like Louisville, SMU, that they were able to get things done and win big games. How did they get that level of consistency? I think what Tosh Lupoi is trying to establish is a little bit of that SEC player that needs to be there. But the Big Ten, the reason why they're not running college football by any means, but they're winning national championships at a high clip right now, is because they've taken the mindset of establishing a high level of roster floor with the players they acquire. And they're trying to also super scout and evaluate that bottom, let's say, third of the roster. Let's make sure that bottom third is at a really high level. And that's something the SEC has, I don't want to say failed at, because they're still a very, very good conference, but there's still a feeling in the SEC of like, man, we have got to be a top 5 recruiting class year in, year out. And to do that, and this is just a reality of the industry that we're in, I think, you see some SEC teams take players that, I mean, if you're in my shoes working for a company like On3 Rivals, you're watching some of those rankings and you're going down there and you're seeing a 4-star, and you've maybe followed that player and watched him and maybe seen him in person, and you say, I just don't see it. Why are they taking that guy? Here's where he's at with his official visits. And then you see him get tossed into a class late. And this is kind of slowed a little bit with the transfer portal, but you see him get tossed into a class like late with a Missouri, this team or that team in the SEC, because he's going to bolster their recruiting ranking, and then the coach can get a pat on the back. Hey, good job, nice win. But really, have you scouted that player to the level that you necessarily need to? No, because we're in the college space, which there's rules of scouting and amount of time spent and things like that coaches and scouting assistants and personnel staffers can have. And it's hurt certain SEC teams. I mean, I think LSU battled that under Brian Kelly, battled that especially late under Ed Ogeron. That's where I think they've fallen a little bit. And I think Lane Kiffin and what they do over there so well is they do scout some 3-stars that they've had to work through at an Ole Miss and bring them in, and then they end up panning out. So I think the ACC does a good job of having that ability to scout and evaluate. Eric Mac Lain mentioned Manny Diaz and what he looks into as far as his roster and scouting players. I think that's a great example. How do you take all of that and then put it all together? And for the ACC, where they need to take that next step, is getting back to some of those top recruiting classes that you can have a higher floor as a whole, and it would kind of round out everything that this league has done to legitimize itself, to roster build the right way. I think the coaching is strong in this league, very, very high quality for the most part. If you put some of these guys like a Jake Dickert, a Manny Diaz, Rhett Lashley, and you put them at, name brand programs, and those programs are certainly building themselves into very high quality programs, particularly, SMU making the college football playoff a couple of years ago and what they've been able to do. But you still say, what could that guy do at, a Tennessee, a Oregon, and you kind of drop them in there because they have, I think, the ability to adapt to where they are and to make it into something special. What those coaches in particular are doing, Tony Elliott, that is underappreciated nationally. And that is something the ACC also has to kind of push forward a little bit more on their messaging is look at the coaching talent in this league because it's pretty high quality. So that is where I think the ACC can take the next step is kind of rounding it all off and figuring out a couple of different pieces to then elevate the rest of the league. Because I don't want to say that coaching is easy because if it was easy, everybody would do it. But you're seeing some of the missteps at a Clemson, at an FSU, what we saw at Virginia Tech in the past, and NC State, I think, is another one. And you're seeing some of the missteps, and you think, okay, there's such a fairly simple answer to this, and a lot of it's money and roster building, but it's just so blatant that sometimes we'll eventually look back on like a Mike Norvell era, or maybe how Dabo Swinney adjusted in the, or lack of adjustment, or kind of tweaked his approach in the transfer portal era, and we'll say, man, everyone else was doing this and doing it a certain way, and these kind of programs kept their blinders on and refused to do it. So it's a particularly interesting spot that the ACC is in, and some of these teams are in, because they have a lot of the answers kind of right in front of them to make it an even better situation. So that's where we can see the ACC take its game up, because you're seeing some of those options that EMAC mentioned, and you're seeing them take the next step as a program, and you're seeing them make conference championship games and take those next steps. It's very important. The entire league needs to get on board. And we've said that, we've kind of banged that drum on the show a little bit. So really good stuff from Eric Mac Lain, and appreciate him jumping on. I will say the tiebreaker situation with the ACC, I wanted to go into a little bit more of why I don't see the college football playoff as a great example of how to fix this. Number one, when you see the college football playoff and the rankings come out on Tuesday night, for example, well, the conference championship game, there has to be a little bit of that clarity by the rankings by late Saturday, early Sunday morning for the ACC. So where are those teams going to fit in so that they know they punched their ticket to the conference championship game? Now, if we see the ACC take some sort of college football playoff ranking approach, I just think it takes the team's ability to control their destiny away. And one reason why I love the ACC playing 9 conference games, I would love them playing 10. I really would. I'd love them playing 10. I think more conferences should play 10. I'm sorry to group of 6 FCS type of schools that miss out on that money, but I think the product in college football is so good that we should be playing that number of games. But if you take the college football playoff rankings and you add them into a tiebreaker, even if it's so late in the tiebreaker scenarios that you're going down, I think it takes the team's ability to control their own destiny out of it. And a 9-game conference slate for pretty much every single team, save for 1 or 2 each year, is going to cause some issues from time to time, but you're not going to get as far down to the college football playoff piece of it. Like, I think the conversation is generally overblown. I just like that there is a number or a exact scenario that you know will play out based on that. And I don't like the human element. I don't like the human element of the college football playoff committee. I think there's got to be some sort of fix to that. I'd love to see it go back to the computers in a sense and figure out that angle of it to make it a better situation. And you know, if that's going to leave a team left out or not from time to time, well, we've already lived that. We lived it with the BCS. And I know that going to the human element, it was a part of the BCS and some of those things. But now that we have a 12-team playoff, it doesn't really need to be that type of a conversation as much anymore. Like, I think 12 teams is the perfect amount, and you don't need a 4-loss team in there at some point with the college football playoff committee, which I think would one day potentially happen. You know, a 4-loss team making it in. You know, that's where we were really close to. Not really close to, but that was some of the conversation around 3-loss teams. So you add 4 more teams in there and you change up some of the ways that teams can get in. I'm just concerned about that. I'm concerned about how the rankings can be impacted by humans and those things. But you know, look, I don't think the ACC ended up having an incredible amount of like harm because of the way Miami performed in the college football playoff. They just happened to lose 2 conference games, and the tiebreaker ended up working against them. So it's a hard situation to go through, but once they get to 9 games, I think we're going to see the tiebreaker scenarios work themselves out. So with that, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed our Thursday edition of the show. Eric Mac Lain, just stellar as always. Really appreciate him jumping on with us. Hope you guys have a great weekend. We will be back next week, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 to 9 a.m. Central Time here on All Access AM. Please hit that subscribe button and check out our sponsors, Horn Legend and Socorro Tequila. Really appreciate them for all their support. Hope you guys have a great weekend and enjoy your Easter holiday for those of you celebrating, and we'll catch you next time on another edition of All Access AM. Thanks for watching. I'm Billy Embody.